Relocating to Creston BC, here's what surprises new residents most. If you're thinking about relocating to Creston BC, there are a few things about living here that might surprise you. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff that you can find by Googling Creston. I mean the little things that you don't really understand until you actually live here. Things like where you're going to shop when there's no Costco or Walmart, why people joke about Kootenay time, and why dressing up might mean putting on jeans and a nice shirt. Why people moving here are often pretty surprised by what their housing budget can still buy. Because Creston gives you a lot of the things that people move to British Columbia for. You've got mountains, space, an outdoor lifestyle, agriculture, a slower pace of life, and housing that can still be relatively attainable. But there is a trade-off. You're giving up some of the conveniences that come with living in a bigger center. So if you're considering moving to Creston, here are some of the things that I think you should know before you get here. First, there are no big box stores. This is probably one of the first things that people notice. There's no Walmart, there's no Costco, there's no Home Depot. This isn't a giant shopping center where you can go out and get everything in one afternoon. For your everyday stuff, we've got grocery stores, pharmacies, hardware stores, local shops, and most of the basics that you're going to need. You're not living in the middle of nowhere. But if you want Costco, a really big shopping trip, certain furniture stores, or more specialized shopping, you're probably going to make a trip somewhere else. Cranbrook is one of the more common places that people go. Some people do head towards Nelson, and depending on what you're looking for, there are people who will shop across the border in the US as well. And after you lived here for a while, you kind of just get used to it. You plan a Cranbrook day, you make your Costco list, and you combine a few things that you need to do. Amazon becomes pretty convenient. I wouldn't necessarily consider this a negative, but it is something to be aware of if you're moving here from a city where you're used to having every store imaginable within 10 minutes of your house, because you definitely don't have that here in Creston. But the trade-off is that you're also not sitting in traffic for an hour to get to those stores. Which brings me to something else people notice here pretty quickly. Life is just slower. You'll hear some people joke about Kootenay time, and there's definitely some truth to it. Things here can move a little slower than what you might be used to. For example, if you need a really good contractor, you might not call them on a Monday and have them at your house on a Tuesday. They might be booked. And depending on the type of work you need done, you might be waiting a little while. There are also certain specialized services where the closest person doing that work might be coming from Cranbrook, Nelson, or somewhere else in the Kootenays. So sometimes you've got to plan ahead. Stores might close a little bit earlier than what you're used to. And some places aren't open 7 days a week. Actually, Monday's quite a sleepy day here in Creston. And there just isn't the expectation here that everything has to happen immediately. People are also generally not in as much of a rush. You're not dealing with a huge commute every morning, and you can drive across Creston pretty quickly. Parking, generally pretty easy. If you can't find parking on the main street, there's a back street where there's tons of parking. People actually stop and talk to each other here. You might run into somebody you know at the grocery store and end up standing there talking for 15 minutes. Sometimes Kootenay time means you're waiting a little longer for something, but it also means life is a little less frantic. And for a lot of people, that's exactly why they moved here. Even the way people dress is more casual. This is one of those really small things that tells you a lot about the culture of the place. Creston is pretty casual. Even me, this is my workwear, just a golf tee and jeans usually. Dressing up here can honestly mean just jeans and a nice top. And of course there are weddings and fundraisers and Christmas parties and events where people do dress up, but overall it's not a particularly formal place. You'll see a lot of people in work boots and jeans, hiking clothes, farm clothes, people coming into town after working outside, people heading down the lake, people who just came off their acreage. It's all very normal. I actually think the way people dress reflects the entire lifestyle here. It's a little bit more laid back, it's practical, and people generally aren't trying that hard to impress each other. And if you're someone who likes a little more casual lifestyle, you'll probably fit right in. Another surprise to some people is just how big and open the valley is. That's my favorite thing about living in Creston. I love the large valley and the long growing season. When people hear the Kootenays, I think a lot of them picture really steep mountains, dense forest, and a little mountain town tucked in one of the narrow valleys. But Creston is different. Creston Valley is actually really wide and open. It reminds me of the Okanagan that way. So you have this huge agricultural valley with mountains surrounding it. There are farms, orchards, fields, acreages, and rural properties all around town. And when people come here for the first time, I think a lot of them are surprised by just how much space there is. Creston itself is in the town center, but when people say they're moving to Creston, that can mean a lot of different things. You could be in Erickson, for example, Canyon, Lister, Windle, West Creston, or even out to Arrow Creek. You might even be heading down the lake, like Kootenay Lake. We're still all part of Creston. So you can be 10 or 15 minutes outside of town and feel like you're completely in the country. That's one of the things that I really like about this area, is you don't necessarily have to choose between being close to services and having some space. I live just 4 kilometers outside of town limits. It takes me like 3 minutes to get to work. You wouldn't even know that town was nearby. I can't see any of my neighbors, but I do have a nice valley view and forest. There are properties where you can have an acreage, shop, animals, a big garden, or just some privacy while still being pretty easy drive from town of Creston. And growing season also surprises people. Creston has a really strong agricultural identity. And if you're moving here because you want to garden, grow your own food, or have some land, this is probably something that you're going to appreciate. We've got orchards, tons of fruit stands, vineyards, farms, market gardens, and obviously a huge amount of agricultural land all throughout the valley. You'll see people with massive vegetable gardens. We've got tons of farmers, and they're at the farmers markets selling their produce. And there are a lot of properties where having fruit trees, chickens, or a greenhouse is completely normal. So people who hear Kootenays and imagine snow for 9 months of the year can be surprised by how productive this valley actually is. The summers get really hot. We have a real growing season, and agriculture is a big part of the identity here. For someone who wants a little bit more of that self-sufficient lifestyle, or even just wants to grow tomatoes in their backyard, Creston, it's a really good fit. Housing can still be surprisingly attainable. That is something I see all the time working in real estate. And I want to be careful here because Creston isn't cheap in the way that it might have been 15 or 20 years ago. Housing prices have gone up here too, but compared with a lot of other desirable communities in BC, your housing dollar can still go a pretty long way. Especially if you're coming from somewhere like the Lower Mainland, Vancouver Island, the Okanagan, or certain other mountain communities. Depending on your budget, you may be able to get something here that would be completely out of reach somewhere else. And maybe that means a detached house instead of a townhouse. Maybe it's a much bigger yard, it's an acreage, maybe it's a shop, it's a property with mountain views, or maybe it's just being able to buy a family home without spending what you would have had to spend in a much larger market. And this is actually one of the biggest reasons I think people continue to look at Creston. You're still getting a beautiful part of BC, you're still surrounded by mountains, and you're close to outdoor recreation. You'll have a real community here. Also, this is Gracie. She was having a crying fit, so I had to run and grab her. You might not have to spend the same amount you would in some of the better known BC destinations. Obviously, every property and every project is a different price range, but relatively speaking, Creston can still offer really good value. And especially if space is important to you, it's worth looking at. But your idea of convenience changes. This is probably the biggest trade-off. You gain space, you gain a quieter lifestyle, you generally get a lot less traffic, but you do give up some convenience. We already talked about shopping, but there's also medical services, specialty appointments, and certain professional services where you may need to travel. Depending on what you need, this could mean Cranbrook, Nelson, or another center. If you fly often, you also need to think about airport access. Cranbrook has the closest major commercial airport for most people here. And again, this is not necessarily a deal breaker, and you just kind of have to plan around it. I often fly out of Spokane because it's a couple hours south. But if you're coming from a city where you're used to having 5 hospitals, 3 Costco's, and an international airport within half an hour, this is going to feel quite a bit different than that. But on the other hand, your everyday life can be pretty convenient. I can get around Creston pretty quickly. You aren't dealing with any major traffic. There's only a couple stoplights here. You're not spending your life commuting. You can go to the grocery store, stop at the bank, get coffee, and be home without losing half your day. So it's kind of like a different type of convenience. The outdoor lifestyle isn't something you have to plan a vacation around. This is another reason that people move to the Kootenays in general. You really don't have to go far and you're outside. My backyard is the mountain. There's hiking, camping, fishing, boating, ATVing, hunting, golf, and Kootenay lakes nearby. If you name it, pretty much we've got it. Depending on what you like doing, there are endless places you can explore with a relatively short drive. And I think one of the nice things about living here is that outdoor recreation is just part of normal life. life. So you can go to the lake for the afternoon, you can go hiking after work, you can take your kids camping for the weekend. You don't necessarily need to plan a huge trip to get somewhere beautiful. It's right here, it's already around you. And that's probably one of the biggest benefits of living here. That's my favorite reason for living here in Creston. Small town community can be an adjustment too. Another thing people notice is that Creston really does feel like a small community. You're going to run into people you know probably fairly often. You'll see the same people at the grocery store. Your kids might go to the same school with someone whose parents you work with. You'll recognize people at community events. There are a lot of local organizations, clubs, sports, fundraisers, and volunteer groups. If you do want to get involved in Creston, there are plenty of ways to do it. And I think that's kind of how you build community here. You show up, you go to events, you join things, you volunteer, support local businesses, and eventually you start to recognize people everywhere you go. For some people moving from a big city, that's a really big change. You have a lot less anonymity. But for people who are looking for a stronger sense of community, that can also be one of the best parts. Also, here in Creston, the weather may not be what you expect. Another misconception is that because Creston is in the Kootenays, it must be cold and snowy all the time. And we definitely have winter here. You are still living in Canada, of course, but we do also have really hot summers. We have spring, we have a beautiful fall, and because of the agricultural valley, the climate here can feel a little different than people expect from a mountain community. So you really do get 4 distinct seasons. If you love gardening and summer weather, you get that. If you like having snow at Christmas, you get that too. And every season has something different to do. We've got snowshoeing, people go backcountry snowboarding and skiing. So who does Creston really work for? I think Creston is a really good fit for someone who values space and lifestyle more than having every possible convenience right outside their door. If you're looking for nightlife every weekend and you need endless restaurants, if you want to be able to shop till 10 o'clock at night, or you need a major airport 15 minutes away, then Creston might feel too small for you. If you want mountains around you and you want to spend more time outside, if you want a bigger yard or some land, if you like the idea of having a garden or an acreage, you want less traffic, and if a slower, more casual lifestyle sounds appealing to you, then Creston makes a lot of sense. And I think that's really the trade-off. You're giving up some big city convenience, but in exchange, you're getting a lot of things that people move to BC looking for in the first place. You got the mountains, wide open space, tons of outdoor recreation, agricultural stuff, community, and slower pace of life. And housing here can still be relatively attainable compared to a lot of places with a similar lifestyle. So if you're thinking about relocating to Creston or anywhere in the Creston Valley, hopefully this gives you a little better idea of what living here actually feels like. And if you enjoy learning about Creston, the Kootenays, local real estate market, and what life is actually like here in Creston, make sure you subscribe to the channel. I share property tours, market information, local places, and everything that you should know about living in this little pocket of British Columbia. And I'll see you in the next one.